HOA Karen ripped my autistic brother's tent. My ex-Navy dad taped her to it on the lawn. Part 1. I didn't even hear the tent tear. I heard the scream first. Not hers. His. There are 1,000 sounds in a suburban neighborhood. Lawn mowers, delivery vans, dogs barking. But when your little brother has autism, you learn to notice different sounds, tiny changes, shifts in breath, the click of a zipper, the crinkle of vinyl. And when those sounds are replaced by screaming, you run. My name is Layla Thomas. I'm 17 and I live in Cedar Hollow, a gated neighborhood that smells like fertilizer, entitlement, and rules. So many rules. Rules about grass length, rules about curtain color, and, apparently, rules about tents. Not the kind you sleep in, not camping gear, but the kind that saves my brother's life every day. My brother Micah is 13, diagnosed with ASD at 2 years old, sensory sensitive, verbal but barely, melts down from bright lights, sudden sounds, and being touched without warning. Loves space, routine, and blue specifically, his calming tent. We got it for him last Christmas. A portable, dark blue pop-up tent with soft mesh windows, blackout panels, and the feeling of being wrapped up in the world without disappearing from it. Inside it were his weighted blanket, his puzzles, his chew necklaces, his universe. We set it up on our front lawn every afternoon after school, because outside meant freedom and the tent meant safety. HOA Karen hated it. She started complaining the first week we unzipped it. This isn't a campground, she barked. It's a residential community. I explained, it's a sensory tent. He needs it. Then keep it in the backyard. She snapped. It's disrupting the aesthetic. I wanted to say what was disrupting the aesthetic was her khaki skirts and weaponized pettiness. But I held my tongue. We tried the backyard. He melted down. Too many shadows. Too much noise from the neighbor's AC unit. He refused to go near it again. So back to the front it went, and that's when the notes started. First, a typed letter in our mailbox, remove unsightly tent. It does not conform with HOA structure color guidelines. Then, a formal violation printed on fake letterhead, signed only CHETRM, which stood for Cedar Hollow Aesthetic Regulation Management. Not a real board, not a real name. Just Karen. Then came the threats, failure to remove said structure may result in enforcement action. We reported it. The city said it was a civil matter. The real HOA said no such violation existed. But no one stopped her. She just kept circling, watching, muttering under her breath when she passed. Micah didn't notice, until she ripped the tent open. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen pouring Gatorade when I heard him scream. Not the whiny frustration of a lost toy, not even the high-pitched panic of a triggered episode. This was deeper, raw. I bolted outside and froze. Karen was yanking one of the tent poles sideways with both hands. Teeth gritted like it was a war, and she was the general. "Get off me," she shrieked, though no one had touched her. Micah was inside, collapsed, fists clutched over his ears, eyes wide with terror. The mesh panel had already been shredded, toys scattered across the grass, weighted blanket half dragged through the dirt. I screamed, "What are you doing?" She turned, breathless. He's not allowed to set up a permanent structure. This isn't a permanent structure. He's autistic. He's disruptive. He was humming. He was calming himself. It's a violation. I didn't realize I was crying until I couldn't speak. She stood over him, her shadow cutting through the ripped blue fabric like a storm cloud. And that's when my father stepped outside. My dad, Marcus Thomas, doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. He's 6'3", built like a mountain, and served 22 years in the U.S. Navy. He's the kind of man who keeps his uniforms in plastic garment bags and teaches neighborhood kids how to tie real knots just for fun. And when he saw Micah sobbing inside that collapsed tent, something inside him clicked into combat mode. Karen was still mid-rant when he crossed the yard in 4 slow, deliberate steps. "Ma'am," he said, calm, You have 5 seconds to get away from my son. He's on community grass 1. I'm allowed to enforce 2. This isn't your personal 3. Karen took a step back, but Dad didn't move. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into the utility bin beside the porch where he kept camping gear and pulled out a full roll of military-grade duct tape. 4. Wait, what are you doing? You can't threaten, but she didn't finish, because he walked past her, stepped into the tent remains, and knelt beside Micah. He didn't say anything. He just pulled the blanket over Micah's shoulders, whispered something low. Micah curled into him, still shaking, still overwhelmed, but safe. And then, Dad stood and turned back toward her. I'm going to ask you to sit down. I will not sit. Down. On the ground. Right here. Karen laughed. You're insane. He raised the duct tape. The laughter stopped. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, but you're not going anywhere until the police get here. You destroyed property. You assaulted a vulnerable minor, and you traumatized my son. Karen scoffed. This is assault, no. Ma'am, this is containment. And then he duct taped her. 2 loops around her wrists, not tight, just firm. 2 more to bind her hands to the pole she bent. Then a final strap from her hip to the center of the tent frame, like she was part of the crime scene. Neighbors came out. Phones came up. Someone gasped. Someone cheered. Micah peeked out from under the blanket and whispered, Is she stuck? Dad smiled softly. She's not going to touch you again. The cops arrived 6 minutes later. Karen screamed about kidnapping, about defamation, about military extremists. They arrested her for destruction of property, harassment of a disabled minor, and impersonating an HOA official. Turns out that C, Kierg, Ea, H'er, M. Nonsense was a 100% fake. No one authorized her. No one backed her. She'd made it all up, letters, threats, everything. The duct tape, the cops called it unconventional nonviolent restraint in response to an active threat. Dad shrugged. Could have used a zip tie. The video went viral before the sirens stopped echoing. Karen destroys autistic boy's tent. Ex-Navy dad restrains her like a pro. HOA Karen meets duct tape justice. Sensory space becomes battleground and a father draws a line. By sunset, we were fielding interview requests. Dad declined. Micah didn't want cameras. I just wanted one thing, for no kid like my brother to ever feel unsafe on his own lawn again. Part 2. There's a difference between quiet and silence. Micah taught me that. Quiet is peaceful, intentional, a safe space where sound is welcome but not needed. Silence. That's what happens when fear takes over. When people stop speaking because they've been made to feel small, unwelcome, or like Micah wrong just for being themselves. After Karen's arrest, our neighborhood was silent, not peaceful, stunned, ashamed, and slowly waking up. Within 2 days of the incident, 5 more families came forward. A mother of a child with Down syndrome said Karen had threatened her with noise complaints because her son sang too loudly on the porch. A veteran with a prosthetic leg was fined for having a visible mobility ramp in front of his house. A Filipino couple was issued repeated fake citations for cultural clutter because of their wind chimes and prayer flags. They all thought they were alone. Turns out, Karen had been running a shadow regime, one built on fake rules, intimidation, and the assumption that no one would fight back, until Dad taped her to her own lie. We called a community meeting at the library. The real HOA board showed up, what was left of it, anyway. 2 volunteers who hadn't realized how much power Karen had seized. People were nervous at first, unsure whether they'd be retaliated against, unsure if speaking up would make things worse. Then Dad stepped up to the mic. He didn't say much. Just this: my son was hurt because someone thought her preference was law. This community didn't stop her, but now we know. And now that we know, we decide who we are. That was it. People started lining up to speak. Mrs. Richardson, who always wore bright purple gardening gloves, told the room Karen had threatened to call ICE on her son-in-law over a misplaced trash bin. Mr. Delaney, a quiet widower, said he'd paid Karen hundreds in violation fees because he thought she had the authority to remove his porch bench. Even our mail carrier testified Karen had tried to ban deliveries to homes with non-conforming decor code for anything not beige. My voice shook when I stepped up, but I said she tore my brother's tent. But it's not about fabric, it's about dignity, and we need to stitch that back together. The room erupted, people clapped, for Micah, for truth, for finally refusing to be silent. The next morning, we formed the Neighborhood Accountability Council, a group of residents, diverse, representative, real, tasked with reviewing every complaint, every citation, every rule Karen had ever invoked. And what we found was a mountain of lies. Karen had created her own letterhead using a bootlegged HOA template, printed dozens of violations that weren't backed by law or HOA charter, cashed over $22,000 in personal checks addressed to C. H. AA, BRR, AIM. Pressured neighbors into compliance by threatening to report them for neighborhood destabilization. She wasn't just a busybody, she was a con artist, one who used fear like currency. The local news ran with it. HOA Karen's tent takedown unravels years of fake enforcement. Community regroups after shocking acts of ableism and fraud. Cedar Hollow, the neighborhood that fought back, national outlets picked up the story. We even got a call from a disability rights coalition based in D.C. They wanted to know if Micah would like to be their youngest ambassador for sensory-inclusive public spaces. We asked him. He tapped his chest and said, "Only if I can keep my tent. Deal." Karen was charged with destruction of property, harassment of a disabled minor, impersonating an HOA official, fraudulent collection of funds, criminal mischief. The prosecution was airtight, and when she tried to claim mental distress and unclear boundaries, the judge shut it down hard. You don't get to rewrite rules just because you don't like how someone exists. She took a plea deal, 18 months probation, full restitution, 200 hours community service, including mandatory work with disability advocacy programs. Some called it lenient. Micah just asked if she'd have to say sorry. 2 weeks later, Karen was court-ordered to appear at a community gathering as part of her restitution. Micah didn't want to go. Dad said we didn't have to, but then Micah surprised us. He wanted to be there. So we brought the new tent, blue, reinforced, better windows, bright stars printed inside. He sat in it on the community center lawn while over 100 people listened to a public statement. Karen stepped forward, shaking, surrounded by the same people she used to find. She looked at Micah and said, "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was protecting my comfort, not your rights. And I'm sorry." Micah didn't speak, but he stood, walked to the center of the lawn, and offered her a paintbrush, because on that day, we had planned a project, a mural, on the back wall of the community center. Micah's idea. He called it Unfolded. Everyone who had been harmed added a handprint. Karen did too. Small, pink, trembling, but real. That mural's still there. A wave of color, a tent in the middle stitched with gold, like something broken and mended with care. Above it, painted in bold script, "This is what we shelter. This is what we rebuild." The HOA bylaws were rewritten from scratch. We banned vague language like unsightly. We outlawed anonymous citations. We established a sensory safe space clause for all community grounds. And most importantly, we declared the right to reasonable accommodation a core value. Micah's tent goes up every day. Sometimes other kids crawl in. Sometimes it's just him and his books and his stims and his hums. But no one bothers him. No one stares. And if they do, they're quickly reminded, you don't mess with the tent, because that tent is stronger than the hands that tried to tear it. Part 3. Some stories start on paper. Ours started on canvas. It began with a mural, a painted tent on the back of the community center wall, hands of every color pressed around it like sun rays, Proof that the fabric Karen ripped became the fabric that bound us. But that mural didn't just sit there. It spread. Not like graffiti, like wildfire. A journalist from The Atlantic visited to do a piece on the tent heard round the suburbs. They called Micah an unlikely pioneer of porch front justice. The article was raw, beautiful, honest. More followed. NBC, NPR, The Guardian. People from all over the country, then Canada, then Europe wrote letters. Some were from teachers, others from parents. One came from a 9-year-old in New Mexico named Jonah, who wrote in crayon, "Dear Micah, I'm autistic too. I wish I had a tent like yours. I'm glad you got your space back. I like blue. Love." Jonah. Micah held that letter to his chest. Then, for the first time ever, he asked if he could write back. We mailed it the next day with a picture of his new tent in a hand-drawn star. That's when the call started. From local city council, from libraries, from schools. They weren't just saying good job. They were saying, how do we build this in our own neighborhoods? So my dad, Micah, and I founded a new project, Tent Line. It started simple, a resource kit. Inside each box, a collapsible blue tent, a laminated guide to sensory regulation, a set of visual supports, noise-canceling headphones, and a sign that read, "This tent is not clutter, it is calm. Please do not disturb." We shipped 100 kits to schools and parks, then 1,000, then 10,000. Tent Line became a registered nonprofit within 6 months. We had volunteers across 19 states. Micah was listed as the honorary co-founder. He didn't love interviews, but he helped design the colors for the tents. Always blue, always stars. Stars don't belong in closets, he told a reporter once. They need space. One afternoon, we received a letter from the ADA National Network. They invited Micah to be a part of their youth leadership program and offered Tent Line a federal partnership pilot. We said yes. Micah didn't speak much at orientation, but when it was his turn to share what inclusion meant to him, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a scrap of the original tent, torn, dirty, but neatly framed. "This is what it started with," he said. "I still hear the sound it made when she ripped it. It was loud, but what came next was louder." That quote became Tent Line's motto, "Louder than the rip." We printed it on every tent panel after that. Karen's probation ended. She quietly sold her house and moved away. There was no announcement, no fanfare, no goodbyes, just a note taped to her mailbox that read, "Vacant." Micah didn't ask about her again. He didn't need to. He had things to build. Back in Cedar Hollow, the changes became permanent. We added a Micah zone to the community green, a soft surface sensory area with tents, weighted beanbags, bubble tubes, and shade sails in navy blue. Kids who were once told to stay off the grass now danced on it barefoot. HOA policy was rewritten. No more vague violations. A standing sensory inclusion committee was established, chaired by 2 neurodivergent parents and a speech-language pathologist. And every HOA letter now begins with, "We recognize that inclusion begins at home." We hosted our first Cedar Hollow Tent Day on the 1-year anniversary of the incident. Over 300 people came. Tents lined the streets blue, purple, striped, starlit. Micah wore his headphones and a shirt that said, "Peace is a structure, too." He didn't say much, but when he climbed into his tent and unzipped the panel, 20 kids followed him in like it was a fortress of safety. One of them whispered, "Can I stay?" He nodded. Of course. That same month, Tent Line launched a nationwide campaign, Tents on the Steps. We challenged communities to place calming tents on city hall lawns, school entrances, and even Capitol steps, not as protests, as presents, to remind the world you can't regulate away our right to be. Over 60 cities participated. Photos poured in, tents in front of courthouses, tents in malls, tents beside polling places, and at the center of it all, Micah's name. Not as a victim, as a builder. He's 14 now, still stims when he's nervous, still loves puzzles, still won't let anyone else zip up his tent. But he no longer jumps when neighbors walk by, because the porch has become sanctuary again. Not just for him, for all of us. Dad still keeps that roll of duct tape in the garage. Not out of anger, out of memory. Some days, he says, you protect with your words. Some days, with your hands. But always with your why. Micah's why: I just wanted somewhere soft. He got it and gave it to the world. Part 4. Micah's tent didn't end up in a museum. It didn't need to. It stayed right where it belonged, on the porch, zipped open halfway, with the sun spilling through the mesh, and a hand-drawn sign hanging above it that said, "You can sit here too." That was Micah's only rule for tent line volunteers when they trained others. No one builds a tent with a zipper that only closes. Tent line became more than a project. It became policy. After Tents on the Steps went national, state legislators from 5 states introduced the Shelter Inclusion Act, a policy package requiring all public schools and parks to offer a designated sensory safe space. HOA covenants to comply with federal disability rights and protections, including calming structures as accommodations, a 24/7 legal support hotline for families targeted by discriminatory HOA enforcement, a ban on anonymous neighborhood citations without proof and signature, the 5th state to pass it ours. Micah was invited to attend the bill signing. He didn't want to wear a suit. He wore blue, and he brought a corner swatch of his first tent in a frame. When the governor asked him if he wanted to say anything, he pointed at the frame cloth and said, "It's not about the tent. It's about who gets to breathe." That quote made headlines. People started calling the act Micah's Law. He didn't care about that. He just cared that when Jonah, the boy from New Mexico, who wrote to him, finally got his own tent line kit, he sent back a photo sitting in it with his cat and a new message in crayon: "Now I get to breathe too." By summer, tent line was in 42 states. We'd partnered with disability rights coalitions, urban planners, and even architects to redesign neighborhoods to be inclusive, not just compliant. One firm designed a neighborhood around the concept of visible, calm-wide porches, integrated sensory gardens, and yes, tents as standard community furniture. They called it the Porch Plan. We cried when they mailed us the first blueprint, because in one corner, hand-labeled in blue ink, it read Micah's tent, facing east so it catches the soft light. Karen never showed her face again. Her name became shorthand in some online communities. Don't go full Karen. But we stopped focusing on her, because focusing on Karen meant staring into a hole, and we had too many stars to plant. Every summer, we now host the Tent Line Retreat. Families from across the country gather, some flying in, some driving hours, just to spend 3 days together in a field of blue tents. We host calming workshops, parent groups. Kids play in sand trays and chew necklaces in weighted tunnels. No one says weird. No one says loud. No one says not here. Micah leads the opening circle. He stands beside his dad, and he says the same line every year: "Welcome to the porch. It's wide enough." The last retreat had 150 families. During closing circle, a mother stood crying as her nonverbal daughter sat in a tent spinning a toy under sunlight. She said, "This is the first time I've seen her sit still outside, not frozen in fear, not overwhelmed, just still." Micah walked over to the girl, knelt down, and offered her his favorite puzzle piece. She took it. No words needed. We expanded Tent Line's mission. We began consulting with police departments on disability-aware responses to mental health calls. Dad led those trainings. He taught officers how to spot signs of sensory overload, how to approach slowly, how to offer calm, not command. When asked why, he said, "The day I taped Karen to that tent, I didn't do it out of rage. I did it because he needed someone to say, 'I see you. You matter. You are not an inconvenience.'" That's what we should all be saying. In uniforms, in schools, in neighborhoods, everywhere. Now, every Tent Line tent includes a calm card. It reads, "This is a safe space. If someone is inside, let them be. They are not invisible. They are not a threat. They are home." Micah's 15 now, taller than me, still doesn't like fireworks, still rocks back and forth when thinking, but he gives speeches now. Short ones, direct. Once, at a disability conference, someone asked him, "What do you want to say to the people who made you feel like you didn't belong?" He didn't hesitate. "I belong. You'll catch up." Our neighborhood looks different too. Not physically, spiritually. Kids who once stayed inside now roam freely. The park has a sensory swing. HOA newsletters include resources for neurodivergent families. And on the anniversary of Tent Day, our neighbors gather on their porches and light blue lanterns. Every porch, even the ones that once stayed dark. Because we all learned you can't change what happened, but you can change what happens next. On the last page of Tent Line's annual report is a photograph. Micah in his tent, Dad sitting beside him, me on the other side, holding Micah's hand. The sun is setting behind us, washing the porch in amber. Underneath, the caption reads, "She tried to tear the tent. He turned it into a banner." Micah smiles more now. Not wide, but soft, peaceful. He says his tent doesn't feel like hiding anymore. It feels like claiming his place, his rhythm, his right. And every now and then, when I sit on the steps and hear the zipper glide shut behind him, I whisper to myself, "This is what justice sounds like." The end.